This is our series on trust and connection that we're working with. This is from Stephen Porges. He's talking about the ability to witness and remain present while we feel vulnerable offers a portal of optimistic outcome. I love that phrase he uses. But just to acknowledge that we move in and out of these states. Sometimes we're in freeze, sometimes we're in flight, we want to get away from it, sometimes we're in fight. And slow exhalations help us calm down, and full, energizing kind of inhalations help us mobilize us back out if we're in freeze. And that we have this ability to work with this. We can throw the energy down, we can stand up and shake it out. And on my website, there's that tab, Emergency Practices, that has a lot of them. And I know a lot of you are already working with them. So if we have 2 or 3 things that we really, it's like, okay, those are my go to things, then that can be really helpful. So keep an eye on what's going on in your system and see if you can just keep yourself as regulated as possible. So Gabor Mate is probably the first person I really learned about the nervous system and the effect of trauma from. And he's talking about this emergence of a self-sustaining, self-regulated human being who can live with other people in a social context and not give ourselves away, boundaried and steady and largely healed from the trauma. And that's something that is a process. And it's also something that we can do a lot with as an adult, but to acknowledge that it really does come from our past. It comes from our childhood. So people who had that stable, self-regulated adult in their life, even just one, had a different experience as a child than people who didn't. And so he talks about the importance of attuned empathy, that not only do we need physical safety and being fed and housed well, but we also need emotional attunement. And if we don't have that, then that really leads to that feeling like there's something wrong, something really wrong. So to really zero in now on today's focus. So again, from Pete Walker, arrested self-protection stifles our healthy anger. And I was so interested in that because why is it that we stop protecting ourselves or that we never start? And so fawning and appeasing people when we're a child is a way to seek safety. So we give in to other people, our parents generally, to their demands, their wishes. Sometimes children will become really compliant and fawning and be the good little girl. They're always, really helpful around the house. They take on a parentified role often. Sometimes they become the parents use them as a confidant or as a substitute partner if they don't feel like they have that connection with their own. But there's always this feeling of my route to safety is to appease other people. And so this is a little bit different than the outwardly expressed fight response, in which we might really yell and scream and get into that outward kind of fighting. Oftentimes this is the inside, it's that internalized, really suppressed fight response. But also we can move between these. So we might sometimes lash out and sometimes turn that inwards. So it's not nobody has just one of these mechanisms. We generally tend to have one that works the best for us in our situation. And then we tend to have they move through the other ones as well. And I thought it was interesting that he said that people who fawn are the most developmentally arrested in their healthy sense of self. So if you were able to lash out and fight or successfully flee in some way, maybe you had your friend's parents were a family where it was safe for you to go, or you daydreamed a lot, or whatever that was. Some kids get really into sports or something. So if you were able to get away in some other way, your healthy sense of self would be not as damaged as if you were just kind of stuck in your family, fawning and trying to appease and trying to create your safety that way. We pay a really high price for that. So one of the ways we can look at this is in the animal world. And the reason why these comparisons are so helpful is because we're talking here about our mammal body and our nervous system. And we share our mammal body and those strategies with animals. And so we've all seen that scared dog baring their throat And oftentimes that's a strategy that we will use as children or as an adult. That just if I'm really helpful and if I pretend, this is the important part for me, is if I pretend that they're not dangerous, then maybe they won't hurt me. So I think there's a couple ways that we do this. Sometimes we're super helpful, we're super nice, we're really placating, we're really, oh, you're so great. We just tell them they're so wonderful. And another one is that if we just pretend that they're not going to hurt us. And sometimes there's a real denial there too. So we don't actually see it. We go against our own threat assessment. And sometimes it's like it's more of a strategy. We still have that sense that they're not safe, but we're trying to appease them. So intergenerational trauma, mental illness, poverty, people who are working all the time. Sometimes our parents aren't able to help us and to protect us. And a lot of times people have a sense of we're on our own. And so it could be that your parents are the ones who are hurting you. And it could be that they're just not able to be effective parents for us. And the result of that, even if as an adult we can look and see, okay, I understand what was going on there, it still doesn't change the fact that nobody was protecting us. So when we look at this question of who protected you as a small child and as a teenager and as a young adult, that can be on so many levels. So for some people, it would be on a level of physical protection. Maybe you had an older sibling who protected you from violence from the parents, or maybe you didn't have that and you were really not protected at all. But it could also be who protected you or who guided you when you were a teenager, and did somebody encourage you to, think about what kind of life you wanted to have or go to school or get an education? Were you guided or were you just kind of on your own to make your own mistakes? And so there's a lot of different ways that we're let down and that we're not protected. And some of them are quite physical and a lot of them are emotional and social, and just that feeling of nobody really cares about us, nobody really sees us. One thing I think is very important, and partly it's important because we tend to shame ourselves, is that our survival strategies aren't random. So if you were ridiculed for having feelings, or many of us talk about this kind of accusation of you're too sensitive, or you need to get over it, or don't let them see that they've hurt you, or all of these ways of handling our feelings that are really suppressing. It's like, I want you to suppress your feelings because whatever it is, I'm not comfortable with it and I can't help you with it. And then we just kind of feel like we need to get over it somehow. So that's one of the ways. Another way is that we might have been punished for being angry. And this tends to be a bit gender based too. Girls tend to have the experience of being told that nice girls don't do that, nice girls don't get angry, nice girls aren't too loud, don't be so aggressive. Boys tend to be given a lot more room to explode with their anger and might even be ridiculed as being a pansy or something if they cry instead of anger. So all of these messages that we get when we're young can combine with the actual experience we had. So if we blurted out something when we were angry, or if we tried to defend ourselves through yelling or screaming or being angry, then that brought down more punishment on us, or some kind of not being safe, or maybe a parent who didn't speak to us for a week or a few days or a few weeks. Then we really quickly learned that that's not a strategy that's going to help. And we're always trying to move in a way that we try to increase our chances of survival through connection with our parents. And so our strategies are not random, and they're also not our fault. If you had been in a different kind of a family or different kind of situation, you would have maybe had a different kind of strategy for safety. And so if someone has, I find especially people who have a fight response tend to shame themselves for that. And, well, if I only didn't have that, then maybe things would have gone better for me. So I think it's really helpful to understand that, in fact, these survival strategies are based on our experience. And people who are self regulated, if we have parents who are self regulated and they can co regulate with us, then that's how we learn how to have our free expression of emotion and We learn how emotion is not a bad thing. It's how we actually connect with each other. It's how we're actually authentic with each other. And very few of us who are doing this kind of work had that in our childhood. We just didn't. So let's pause here on the screen for a minute and sit with this in terms of shame, especially. So when we understand, I think a lot of us can look back as children and say, okay, I see that as a child, I couldn't move my body to a safe place, for instance. I didn't have a job. I'm 5 years old. I don't have any authority. I'm not big enough to protect myself. So it's relatively easy, I think, for us to look back and start to do that work of reconnecting with ourselves and feeling compassion and kindness. When we're adults, I think a lot of times we have this kind of delusion thinking of, well, I'm 18 or I'm 25 or I'm 30 now, and I should know how to do this. And in fact, we still often don't have a lot of agency. We have more, and we also are working within these constraints. I was fired one time when I spoke up. I was a single mother as a waitress, and I was fired because I spoke up about sexual harassment in the workplace. And I didn't have a way to support myself other than what I made. Luckily, I could find another job, which I did. But we know that being true to ourselves and speaking up against injustice or speaking up for ourselves isn't risk free. Our families, especially, are so important. We can't go out and easily find another family. And so, if we know from experience that we're ostracized if we tell the truth, that is a really high cost. So, we want to be working with our own internal healing and developing the strength and resilience to protect ourselves in more healthy ways. And also being realistic and we don't have to blow up our life in order to make this work. Oftentimes we do have to distance ourselves or have different kind of boundaries. Sometimes it means we have to cut ourselves off completely. But the real beginning and the foundation of the work is our own internal work. And that feeling, what we're specifically focusing on this week is why bother? It's too late. They're not going to believe me anyway. It doesn't matter. And that kind of giving up, this arrested self protection that Pete Walker talks about. So, this is this kind of connection of all of these experiences we've had as children and as adults, and to not take lightly the impact of healing, and that there are people who are not going to enjoy that and who are not going to make that easy for us. And it doesn't mean we can't do it, but it means that this is a complicated process and we need to be really working with kindness for ourselves. So let's look at this for a few minutes. Did you give up on being protected? Did you give up on protecting yourself? Do you feel hopeless and unworthy of protection? That would be the core deficiency beliefs coming in. So, what was your experience? And maybe you didn't. Maybe you always were fierce about protecting yourself. So, maybe this particular question doesn't apply so much. Just sit, really notice your body. What's going on in your body as you're looking at those questions? And if you're feeling like you're being flooded with something, come back, notice your breath, notice your feet on the floor, do some tapping, hold your hand. So see if you can stay steady in your body as you're looking. And if you feel like that's true, that you did give up on protecting yourself, or that you feel like it's hopeless, notice if you could be connected with that, with yourself, with kindness. What was that like at whatever age is coming up for you to just give up on protecting yourself? Notice the thoughts that are here. It might be, well, I wasn't being protected, but I wasn't giving up. I didn't express it outwardly, but I turned it inwardly, but I was angry. I can feel that right now. What happened wasn't fair. So there could be all kinds of responses to this too. So one thing that can be helpful is to see this was a strategy that I developed because of my experience, but inside I was doing something different. I was feeling something different. So this quote that we were talking about earlier, that angering, this process of feeling and expressing anger, releases the accumulation of unexpressed hostile feelings about parental injustice. And this is from Pete Walker. So if we have been treated unfairly, we are going to have feelings about that. And some of those feelings we might have suppressed, and they're in a state of freeze. We really couldn't express them, but we might not have been able to afford to even feel them. So if our survival really depended on trying to keep that connection as much as we could, or if we had a lot of more extreme experiences as a child where there was raging in the family, or there was something that didn't make it safe for us to feel or to express it, then those that accumulation is still there, and it can feel like a powder keg, and we don't necessarily want to express it directly to that person right at the moment, although we might, but we do want to be able to start releasing some of what's in there. And one of the first steps to that is to really see clearly and to feel that in the body, and to notice right now, even as you're looking at that, how does that feel in your body? Do you feel anger in your body right now? Do you feel kind of cold? Has your attention gone off somewhere else? Do you not want to look at that picture? That's a difficult picture. And don't put any particular pressure on yourself to feel a certain way. Take a few breaths, and let's move away from that and into, we'll do several minutes of this inquiry. So if you want to get comfortable, sometimes people like to have a journal or something and make notes. That's fine. Sometimes people like to just kind of sit with it. So there's several different inquiries we could be working with. So just let your attention be drawn. So the basic way I have this kind of set up is on the one side, and I usually think about to the left. This comes from Dan McClintock with the Kilby inquiries. Kind of over there on the left side of my body, but not in my body, on the left side, I have all of my conditioned beliefs. And on the right side is freedom from those beliefs. And something in the middle is sticky. So something is keeping us from freedom. So, freedom in this sense, when we're talking about emotions, is feeling our emotions. We feel a wide range, including anger, grief, sadness, joy, happiness, all kinds of emotion. And we just feel them. We don't suppress them. We express them, and then they move through. That's always how it happens. And also, in terms of protection, that we know that we're worthy of protection and safety, and we don't have any hesitation or any cognitive distance around that. We protect ourselves, we let other people help us. So there's that freedom from these conditioned beliefs. The way conditioning works, of course, is that we have experiences over a period of time, and children are very vulnerable to conditioning, so are adults. And so we have these beliefs that we formed over years of experience. So we can look at the beliefs and see them and then do some inquiry into them. So it happened a long time ago. It won't help to get angry about it now. So that's something we might have an unconscious belief about, or we might be telling ourselves, well, they couldn't help it, or especially if we can really see now that there was trauma in our parents and that they really couldn't help it, that it won't help to get angry about it now isn't true. We do still need to do something with the feelings and the suppressed feelings in particular. We might have a belief that no one will protect me because that's how it happened, and that I can't protect myself. And that's very true as a child, and it's not as true as an adult. So we can look at that as well. And then we might really just still feel like I'm not so sure that I was worthy of protection. I really feel like there's something wrong with me, that's why it happened to me. I feel really broken. I can't imagine that I would ever feel any different. So as you're working with one of those or other ones that come up for you, what are your conditioned beliefs around protecting yourself and around anger in particular? Injustice, anger. What are your conditioned beliefs around that? And let's take a moment to kind of feel into that. And when we do that, one of those might really resonate, or there might be something else. What we're doing next is we're looking at a reverse inquiry, which means we're going to say something that we don't really feel is true. And then we're going to let our unconscious mind, our system, tell us why we don't feel like that's true. So if I say, I trust myself and others to protect me, something in our body and our mind is going to argue with that if it doesn't feel completely true. Or I can ask for help when I need it. If our experience has always been that we were punished or we were ignored or things got worse, then that doesn't feel true. And so, maybe your chest suddenly got tight. Maybe you just had clenched teeth. So pick a reverse inquiry that feels related to how you're stuck. What is in the way of freedom? What are the conditioned beliefs that are in the way of that? And then I'm going to stop talking for a while so that you can really, really work with this. Maintain that awareness of right now, you're safe. Notice your body, notice your breath, take some breaks, come back when you need to. And then just go into the inquiry. And if your mind is kind of searching around for the perfect thing, or if it feels like this is too big, see if you can find something kind of specific to work with right now. And then let your body tell you what's going on. Notice the energy and sensations. Notice the thoughts in the mind and work with those. Always remembering, even though we're thinking about or having memories of experiences and patterns from childhood, that we're an adult now. We're safe in the room that we're in. It's okay for us to be looking at this. And if it's not, we can back away from it a bit. We have tools like breathing and orienting that we can use to settle our body. Stay really present in this moment as you're working with this. And if all of this feels like it's just kind of too much, it's also great just to come back into noticing your body, maybe putting your hand on your heart. Let your breath be kind of soft. There's no right or wrong way to do this. We're going to finish the inquiry in about another minute or so. So make a note if there are things that are coming up that you'd like to look into later. Notice how you feel in your body right now. Was there something kind of surprising? Did it feel too powerful and you kind of took a step back? All of those, anything that was going on is fine in terms of the inquiry. We can let ourselves have whatever experience we have. We don't have to do this in a certain way.